Okay, so I think we should get started. Unfortunately, Dr. Kaiser could not be with us today, but we do have Dr. Khan here and ITE FAU. So we're very excited to have Ms. Jodi Godfrey join us today. Without further ado, we'd like Itilio, our Vice President, to introduce our speaker.
Okay, hello everyone, thank you for being here. So I'm going to give you a quick bio of Ms. Godfrey. So Jodi Godfrey, she's a Senior Research Associate at the Center for Urban Transportation Research at the University of South Florida, where she works on the Transit Safety and Workforce Development Program. Ms. Godfrey received her bachelor's and master's degree in civil engineering from the University of South Florida. She's the current section representative of the Greater Tampa Section Institute of Transportation Engineers, the co-chair of the International Women in IT Committee, the secretary of the Transportation Research Board's, the TRB, Standing Committee on Transit Safety and Security, the vice chair of TRB Committee of Light Rail Transit Systems, and the vice chair of the American Public Transportation Association Bus Safety Committee. Jodi was named an International IT Young Leader to follow in the inaugural class of 2021. Ms. Godfrey has published work related to employee safety reporting, crashworthiness and crash energy management of transit buses, onboard technology to reduce accidents and incidents, National Household Travel Survey trend data analysis, the role of public transit in natural disaster response, attracting and retaining women transportation industry, training initiatives to reduce accidents and incidents, responding to human trafficking, and more. It's a pleasure to have you here with us, Ms. Godfrey. Before we start, I just, please, if you have any questions, we're going to go through them at the end of the presentation. So any questions that you have by the end, you can either unmute yourself and ask, or just post them in the chat while the presentation is happening, and we'll go over it by the end. Thank you, and the floor is yours, Ms. Godfrey.
Thank you so much, Attilio. I also, I guess, failed to put in my bio that I'm the current USF ITE faculty advisor as of the beginning of this year as well. So I hold a lot of different hats, and I'm really pleased to get to come talk to you all today. Today, I'm going to talk about transit safety and security kind of in general. Before I get too far, I wanted to kind of introduce myself beyond what I would consider my bio, in that kind of who am I? So typically I would ask, who are you? But considering we're all virtual here, I asked Jasmine a little bit about you guys to try to get a feel of who is in the audience. But I will say that if you're graduating this semester or soon, I'd love for you to just put your name and your email with a, graduating in parentheses in the chat, because we're always looking to connect those that are looking for employment to those that are looking for new employees. And I have a lot of those connections, so I'm hoping that maybe we can be mutually beneficial in this discussion. Okay, so who am I? Titles, are really how we define ourselves, and our titles change over time. So you heard a lot of what I do for work and what I volunteer as on the side for a lot of these other organizations, but I'm also a woman. I'm a mom to an 11-year-old boy. I am a wife of 12 years. I'm a sister. I'm also an employee here at Cutter. And then, like Attilio mentioned, I have a lot of these other titles that go along with it. But I really wanted to mention all of these things because all of who we are, all of these aspects kind of give us a different perspective about how we approach all of the problems and the challenges that we see. And they give us a different perspective on how we kind of come up with answers. And so it's important to think about, where our perspectives come from, what kind of unintentional biases we may have just from the way that we were raised or the environment that we live in. Okay, so I love data. I am an an engineer, an engineered by heart, right? And I've always loved data. And I wanted to analyze data when I was done with school. All I wanted to do was analyze data that would be meaningful. And I wanted to know that what I was doing could make a difference because of the numbers that I could, proverbially crunch. And I loved so many aspects of transportation engineering. I just didn't really know where I wanted to settle. And the only reason that I really loved transportation engineering was because it was so different with every challenge, right? Because it involves people, it gave me a new challenge every time, and I could never get bored. And so when I graduated, I applied to several different local agencies. I applied to engineering firms all over Tampa. And to all of them, I told them, I can't wait to do work. I just don't want to do any transit work. And I graduated and I got offers to all of those places that I applied to. And then I ended up staying at USF. And the first assignment that I received, any guesses? Transit. But I realized through that first assignment that I really, really loved transit. And so what I realized, I guess, from that perspective was that sometimes we give ourselves these blinders, these walls of what we expect out of ourselves and what we really think we want to do. And sometimes we have no idea what we actually want to do. And so it's important to keep your mind open, especially as you get closer to graduation. Okay. So beyond about me, why should you listen to me? Why should you care about what I have to talk about? And I'll say that you should care because the transportation industry really needs more talent, just like you. And, working in transportation can be tons of fun and opportunities are crazy abundant. So for instance, I love to travel and I love to explore new places. And this career really provides that opportunity to me in so many different ways. I also work hard to make that travel option a reality by completing projects and working to disseminate them widely. And so one thing that you'll notice that I'm going to emphasize kind of throughout this whole presentation is relatability. And that's kind of the tone of my presentation, I think, in general. I know that you're going to receive tons of technical presentations that'll be graph heavy with tons of formulas and intimidating verbiage that's going to make you question how much you really understood all those lectures that you've been sitting through. And I could honestly do that too, but I found that the ability to present very technical information in the way that everybody feels like they can relate and that they can have an impact, that's when you can really gain the audience's attention and help them to walk away with at least one morsel of your presentation that they're going to remember. Because we have to remember that as engineers, it's vitally important that we make our audiences feel that same passion that we do, because most people don't love numbers and figures as much as we do. I know, shocking. But why else should you listen to me? Well, if you're a student, and I know many of you are, I'm hoping you'll pull your phone out and apply, if you haven't already, to the McGrath Student Scholarship. Applications are due really soon, September 22nd, but you'll be recognized at the Florida-Puerto Rico ITE annual meeting, which will be in St. Petersburg, October 22nd through the 24th. So this is a really great opportunity for all of the students to apply. There's also the Pete Yock Volunteer Award, which is an award that just started this year, looking to recognize students that maybe haven't been involved in ITE for as long as some of the awardees for that previous Mark McGrath Scholarship, award. And so if you've done any kind of volunteering with ITE or with any other organization, please scan this QR code and apply to the scholarship, because we are looking to give away money. Okay, so for today, the focus that I want to talk about for the most part is some of the rewarding projects that I've really been privileged to get to work on. And then I'll talk about a couple that I'm just beginning to work on. And then, of course, I've left some time for questions at the end. So the first project I wanted to talk about is the FTA, the Federal Transit Administration Safety Standards Development Program. So one of the first projects that I got to work on when I started as faculty here was the FTA Standard Strategic Plan. And that was really awesome because this whole group of researchers went out and asked all of these different transit agency representatives kind of what their challenges are. And we were able to synthesize everything into a strategic plan of what FTA should focus on over the next several years, understanding that their resources are limited just as ours, just as any. So from that FTA Standard Strategic Plan, the FTA decided to fund the Safety Standards Development Program, to which we won the proposal. And that Safety Standards Development Program involved the development of a safety standards working group. And so this was really cool. We pulled together representatives from large, medium, and small, both urban and rural, geographically dispersed transit agencies and leading industry stakeholders. So this is like WMATA from Washington, D.C., and SEPTA in Philly, MARTA in Atlanta, MBTA in Boston, New York MTA, BART in San Francisco, Austin Metro in Texas, LA Metro, TriMet up in Portland, Broward County Transit, which was a smaller to medium-sized agency. And then we also had the CTAA, the National Rural, RTAP, APTA, the American Public Transportation Association, and we had some labor representation with the ATU as well. And so from this, we've developed 26 reports and guidance documents. And I'll make sure that these slides are shared with you all because this is an active link up there. So it can show you all of the documents that have come out thus far. And so I'm going to go over just a few of them and I'm going to hone in on just one. So these are all, I didn't list all 26. I only listed the ones that I personally worked on. But for instance, the light rail technology scan, we got to go around to different transit agencies all over the country that operate light rail. And we got to ask them what challenges they're facing and how they're mitigating those challenges. And then, of course, take tons of pictures for the report and collect lots of data that we can analyze and make graphs so that we can come up with findings. And so, again, this is one of those projects that not only do you get to travel while you're doing it, and go see all these really cool transit agencies and all the different things they're doing. But then afterwards, we get to travel and share the findings of the reports. And so if you really love to travel, there's some really great opportunities within this industry for sure. Another report that I was really proud to work on is the mitigation for trespasser and suicide fatalities and injuries. This was an interesting project because, you know, mitigating trespassers and mitigating suicides are much different in that, you know, trespassers are typically looking for a convenience, a route of convenience, whereas suicides are typically intentional. And so it's sometimes different approaches, but yet at the same time, many of these mitigation measures will work to mitigate both trespassers and suicides. Medical fitness for duty and fatigue risk management was another really interesting one where we got to look into a lot of circadian rhythms and the things that affect how sleepy you get throughout the day and how well you can continue to focus after doing the same task repeatedly for a long time. And the human body is incredibly interesting. And it's definitely outside of the typical transportation realm. So it kept me on my toes and I got to learn all kinds of new, fun, interesting stuff. Let's see, the accident and incident investigations for both bus and rail were really interesting as well. There's a lot that goes into an investigation that you might not think of. So there are really long, detailed documents. Some of the other things that we've published recently, over-the-counter prescription drug use in the public transit industry, roadway pedestrian grade crossing exploratory report. So we were looking at all of the variations in the different transit and pedestrian grade crossings. And then effective practices in bus and rail accident investigations. Crashworthiness was a fun one for sure to look at, specifically for the less than 30-foot buses, because these cutaway, smaller buses are typically used for some of the most vulnerable passengers, and they're also not typically constructed directly from the manufacturer, but are constructed in a two-phase construction. And so the body and chassis come from the OEM, and then the frame is then put on the body and chassis in a separate construction. And so that introduces new vulnerabilities. And we worked with Florida State University and some of the stuff that crash testing they've done there, and testing some of the connections, and came up with some really awesome and helpful findings for transit agencies. Some of the most recent reports that were published were on related to battery electric buses. And that's where I'm going to focus the majority of the rest of this talk, is in the procuring and maintaining battery electric buses and charging systems best practices. And so there are a lot of transit agencies right now that are operating battery electric buses for the first time, or are just starting to procure their battery electric buses. And they're facing a lot of challenges, and they're new challenges that they never faced with typical diesel buses before. So I wanted to kind of dive into just one of these reports to kind of show some of what the findings look like. But first, let's take a step back and we'll talk about some of the methodology of it. So we performed a literature review, and then we identified existing standards and recommended practices and guidance documents that already existed related to battery electric buses. And then we conducted a gap analysis. And this included the identification of existing standards or guidance that really needed to be modified or enhanced. And then throughout the entire report development and dissemination, in addition to the transit agency representatives who were interviewed, the project team also engaged with that Cutter Standards Working Group that I talked about earlier, and APTA, and included its Standards Bus Program, the APTA Standards Bus Program Electric Bus Subcommittee. And so all of us worked together to come up with actionable steps that we could synthesize all of the information to come up with these actionable steps that are reported to agencies in a manner that they can actually do something. Remembering that a lot of the representatives from transit agencies that can actually do something might not be engineers. And so we have to give them these actionable steps in ways that are easy for them to actually do something. Okay, so the first finding that we came up with is that agencies that include original equipment manufacturer part availability expectations in their contract negotiations or procurement language might reduce associated challenges with the unavailability of necessary replacement parts. So the biggest takeaway here is that agencies that ordered these battery electric buses were forced to keep them in the garage rather than being able to use them for revenue service. And because they weren't available, right? And a bus in a garage isn't beneficial to a transit agency by any means. So to reduce that lead time to obtaining the necessary parts, agencies suggested that you include that requirement of that spare part availability in the contract. You can see from the figure here to the right that about 50% of the issues were actually full bus total delay issues, but about 30%, 29% experienced challenges with parts. And so therefore they couldn't put their buses on the roads because of the parts that they needed. The second finding from this report is that regional or state procurement contracts provide agencies with an opportunity to leverage the benefits of economies of scale, negotiated procurement language, and pooled funding when it's available. And we see similar related benefits in the Transit Research Inspection Procurement Services, or the TRIPS program that we conduct for the Florida DOT, where agencies can benefit from having a statewide negotiated contract that they can order from. The third finding from this is to request clear language in the battery warranty that dictates whether the warranty applies to the battery system or the individual battery packs, cells, or other battery management systems within the system. And this is really to reduce the ambiguity of the warranty, because some agencies found that their contract was just ambiguous enough that they were unable to obtain the battery system replacements if just individual battery packs were damaged or needed to be replaced. So that was a really valuable finding. The fourth finding is that it's beneficial to include battery storage and disposal or recycling details and procurement language to reduce these unexpected issues that may come up when the battery systems reach the end of their useful life. So at the time that this particular data was collected, there weren't any transit agencies that we had talked to that had come to the end of their useful life, but there were some that had not thought about what they were going to do with the batteries when they did come to the end of their useful life. And so this is definitely a finding for future agencies to look at. The fifth finding, depending on fleet conversion goals, it might be necessary to redesign routes or operating parameters to accommodate battery electric bus performance capabilities, or even to accommodate en-route charging if that's the way you choose to go. And performance capabilities can vary with extreme weather. And so route design really might also need to vary by the season in some geographies, depending on the climate. Additionally, some agencies found that it's not just a one-to-one ratio replacement for battery electric buses to diesel buses due to some of the operating limitations that battery electric buses face. And so that's another important aspect to consider as you start to transition your fleet. So training is important in every aspect, I think, of the transportation industry, and battery electric buses is no exception there. Standardized training is really necessary for many positions, not just the frontline employees. Operators can benefit from training to understand the differences between the ways that battery electric buses maneuver compared to a diesel bus, including training operators for optimal regenerative braking operations. Technicians are sometimes scared to work on these buses because of the unknowns and uncertainties, and they're not confident in their abilities like they were with diesel buses because they haven't worked on them as much, right? So additional training may help to ease their concerns. Route planners and schedules should also understand the unique differences of a battery electric bus compared to a diesel bus. That way they can accommodate the schedules accordingly to ensure that operators aren't going to run out of charge while they're mid-route. And then also some things that some agencies certainly have not considered is that first responders should also be trained, at the very least, in how to deactivate the electricity in a bus in case they're called to respond to an event involving a battery electric bus. Also, they should be trained to recognize that it is a battery electric bus. Okay, the seventh recommendation, whether planning for the first battery electric bus procurement or planning for a battery electric bus fleet expansion, facilities require charging infrastructure installation. Lifts that are rated for the weight of a battery electric bus, fire suppression systems, and storage space for batteries and spare parts. And all of these things accumulate space, especially when transitioning to larger fleets. So it's important also to consider that battery electric buses have roof-mounted equipment. So you might require personnel lifts for the top of the bus maintenance, which might also lead to the requirement of additional fall protection or other safety maneuvers. And then as agencies begin to mix fleets during their second and third battery electric bus procurements, the need for interoperability, regardless of the make or manufacturer of the vehicle charging system, will be even more pronounced. Thus, it may be beneficial to require interoperability in the procurement language, because having some buses that will only charge in certain places makes scheduling charging much more complicated. Resiliency and backup source considerations. So fuel diversification and the availability of backup power may be beneficial when power is unavailable unavailable for extended periods of time, such as hurricane events or other natural disasters. Batteries and water don't mix. And so when dealing with a natural disaster, such as a hurricane, transit agencies are often called to assist in the movement of evacuees, and it's prudent to ensure that the entire fleet is not dependent on one type of power source. Charging infrastructure is certainly advancing. Jasmine and I were talking about how the AI world is advancing so quickly, and this is another world that's really advancing really quickly, certainly now. Higher power, ultra-fast charging systems are entering the market with a promise of reducing dwell time for charging and possibly even allowing battery electric buses to serve longer routes than traditionally thought. Additionally, using smart charging, managed charging, or other charging optimization techniques could lead to greater cost savings, especially as your BEV fleet sizes increase. So we did find some differences in the agencies that answered with larger BEV fleets compared to less battery electric buses, and whether or not they were optimizing their charging, because it doesn't make too much of a difference if you're just charging 1 or 2 buses, but when you're charging your entire fleet, those cost savings make a much bigger difference. Which leads to this variable utility rates can lead to inconsistent charging costs. And so agencies really have limited negotiation powers when it comes to the utility providers. So they should consider the variations in utility rates by the time of day, and then maybe require a charging schedule that could maximize the use of electricity and non-peak times when possible. And the final finding from this particular report is that transit agencies may feel more confident initiating the decarbonization of their bus fleets with the understanding that there are often options to lease charging equipment from utility companies rather than the transit agency owning full responsibility for the charging infrastructure. Some transit agencies rent the use of the charging system from the utility company, and the utility company is in charge of the operation and maintenance of the actual charging system. So it's important to include your utility company in the conversations as soon as you start to consider a battery electric bus fleet conversion. So beyond just the findings of the reports, I mentioned that it's important to be relatable, but it's also really important to build relationships. And the one thing that the standards development program really helped to foster was long-term relationships with so many different transit agencies and industry representatives. And we got to travel all over together repeatedly. We traveled about 3 times a year together from 2018 up until February of this year. And so we got to go to so many different places. The picture here on the slide is from Pueblo, Colorado. We were at the TTC facility, the Transportation Technology Center facility, and they were training firefighters at the time out there on how to put out different chemicals on the rail line. And so they were burning different chemicals in each of these different tank cars, and each of the chemicals burned a different color so that the firefighters would, trainees would know what materials to use to put the fires out. It was really an interesting perspective that we all got to learn. And we got to wear some really cool safety garbs. So I don't get to look that cool every day at work. This photo was when we were in SEPTA. Here we were at the rollover rig in Washington, D.C. And so this one's really cool. You get to go inside this rig and they can tilt it. It doesn't look that intense the way that it's tilted there from the outside, but I promise you when you're inside and you're tilted to that extreme angle, it's pretty difficult to keep yourself upright and walk through. They also have the ability to put some fake smoke in there so that you can practice all kinds of different scenarios. This was a really cool field trip that we got to go on with the whole working group. And this was at MARTA. We were looking at some of the technologies that they've put on the bottom of the train that that they can run just as fast as a revenue service train, or even add it to the back of a revenue service train, and it collects all of the wheel-rail interactions underneath with lots of sensors and videos so that you can identify challenges, hotspots, issues within that wheel-rail interaction that you might not be able to recognize just from going out and inspecting the rail line physically. You're also reducing the safety challenges associated with inspection because you can do everything automated on that train and have to send less people out onto the track. And we even met through the pandemic. So this is a picture of several of us at the cable car in San Francisco, waiting as it was coming up after one of our other 2-day meetings. We typically try to add some sort of field trip in. So we took a transit tour around all of San Francisco, which included the cable car. Okay, so some upcoming report publications. So we're not quite done with the standards development program as of yet. There are still 2 more reports that are in the hopper to be released, utilizing artificial intelligence and vision-based systems for monitoring trespassing, and also mobility data standards and specifications for interoperability. And I co-authored both of those fantastic reports that are coming out and will be very useful for the industry moving forward. I want to make sure that I give enough time for questions. So I'll skip past some of the details that I had for those. But I did want to talk about this other project that I also get to work on for the FTA, where we are on a group that is that serves as independent evaluators for the Safety Research Demonstration Program. And this has been one of my favorite projects because we get to watch some of the really exciting work that so many others are doing and give them insight to some of the things that maybe they didn't consider as they're developing their scopes, and also give them some insight and some guidance as they continue throughout their projects. And so one of the really fun ones is pictured here, the Pierce Transit Automated Collision Avoidance and Mitigation Safety Research Demonstration Project. They're showing in the picture there on the cover at Virginia at VTTI, they had the dummy come out and they pulled the dummy in front of the automated bus, and the automated brakes kicked in and the dummy survived, and it was fantastic. There was so much that went into that particular project, including looking at the forces that would be applied to standees in an automated emergency braking situation. Ultimately, Pierce Transit decided not to move forward with revenue testing for this particular technology, but the report did end up with some really great findings that will be useful to other transit agencies should they also decide to move forward in a similar project in the future. Currently, TriMet is working on a risk ranking tool using AI video analytics to rank their grade crossing intersections to determine where they should put their funding. So that's been a really fun project to be the independent evaluator on. Another really interesting one is the front of train options for mitigations of fatalities in train and human interaction events for New York MTA. And so they're working with a huge group, including Trinity College in Dublin and Virginia Tech and several other contractors who are coming up with all kinds of ideas, such as false floors with airbags or netting or something to encapsulate someone who maybe were to come in front of a train rather than pushing them out, which could cause additional injuries. Another one that was really interesting was the transit mirror configuration project that happened for the buses in New York MTA. And that one was interesting because in order to test bus mirror configurations, they actually had to get some waivers through FHWA, which wasn't necessarily something they had thought about in the first place. So it was one of those projects that we all had a learning lesson from. I do more besides just the federal work. I also do some work for the Florida Department of Transportation, FDOT, and some of the fun projects that I've worked on recently. We completed a report for hiring and retaining employees in the transit industry, which was published in June of this year on the FDOT website. In addition, one of my favorite projects I think that I've ever got to work on, mostly because I feel like I had the opportunity to really change someone's life, is the project that I did on stopping human trafficking. And so this project came about through some surveys that we had developed through the Florida Transportation Safety and Operations Network. And we asked agencies whether or not they provided human trafficking awareness training. And then we asked if they had any policies or procedures for employees to follow if they did recognize human trafficking. And what we found back in early 2022 was that those procedures really didn't exist. And so we came up with an idea. We proposed it to FDOT, and they funded it in coordination with Truckers Against Trafficking. And we worked to develop a human trafficking procedure template that transit agencies can adopt and adapt at their agency, that just walks through all of the steps that a frontline employee should follow, a dispatcher should follow, or a safety supervisor should follow if someone suspects a human trafficking situation. And so I'm really proud of that particular project, and I've been doing my best to go around all over the country to share that as a resource. We also have, we just recently won the Transit Worker and Rider Safety Best Practices Research Project, and that was announced August 9th. And we're really excited to get to work on some of these challenges that transit agencies are facing, addressing not only worker assaults, but also rider assaults. And the interesting thing about this project, I guess, the challenging part is that we want to paint the picture fully, but we also want to be cognizant that we're not painting a picture that's going to deter potential transit users from using transit because it looks like it's more unsafe than it actually is, right? So it's a fine line that we're certainly walking to identify the challenges and use the best verbiage possible, and also determine the most effective mitigation strategies to minimize those risks and promote safer transit travel. So I've promised to leave some time for questions, but in the questions, I would love to know kind of what you want to do, what your goals are. You can type it in the chat if you're more comfortable typing in the chat than writing it out or talking. But I'd love to try to connect what your passions are with people that I know in the industry that have similar passions, because it's always great to find friends that love the same things that we do. So as I open it for questions, I'll leave this slide up with my email address as well. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime and connect with me on LinkedIn as well.
Thank you, Ms. Godfrey, for a great presentation. If you guys have questions, you can either unmute or put them in the chat, and Aitoyo will moderate this part of the webinar.
Okay, so thank you, Ms. Godfrey, for your presentation. Before, as Jasmine said, if you have any questions, please either you can type in the chat or unmute yourself and ask. And I actually want to start with a question. At the very beginning of your presentation, you mentioned one project that one of the topics was related to mitigation methods for suicide. How does that even work? Like, could you give us like information about this?
Sure, yeah. So for suicides, a lot of it is removing opportunity for access, removing opportunity in general. So where it's possible, fencing certainly helps. but providing also any kind of cameras that can send someone out right away, right? Any kind of technology that can be used to identify strange behavior, such as loitering near a train stop, right, for instance, can really help to send the right resources at the right time. Signage is another one that was really big, just mentioning, the National Suicide Hotline around in some of those prone areas. I don't know if it helps, but it certainly increased the number of calls to the suicide hotline.
Okay, see. Thank you. And just one more. You mentioned one of the projects that was it was related to the use of AI for trespassing prevention. I haven't had the chance to work with AI that much, but AI and machine learning is a topic that I'm very interested in. And in this area, the project that you mentioned for trespassing prevention, in what ways can AI be used for this?
Yeah, so Brightline has a great example of this, and I know they're not transit per se, but they are certainly in the transportation industry. But they have cameras all along their right of way, but they also have a drone with a camera that has a speaker as well. And so if they recognize, using this AI technology, if they recognize something that is shown on the right of way that should not be there, they can identify whether or not it's a person and send that drone directly to where it is and inform that person that they're trespassing and to exit the right of way, right? Or that they're in danger. And this was a new idea that had just started when we talked to Brightline. I guess it was about a year and a half ago now. But there are other ideas of, for instance, Houston Metro has their entire rail line under surveillance cameras. And so there are tons of opportunities for AI use of the video that's already being collected to really help to improve the response and decrease the response time.
Okay, thank you. And also very quickly, since you asked us something, I want to just give my my answer for that question. So I would say that in my case, what I want to do when it comes to me being a transportation engineer, when I got into civil engineering, I didn't think at all about transportation engineering, and I would say maybe that would be the case for most transportation engineers. I don't, of course, I'm just saying about my own experience. I didn't have, I think I didn't know much about transportation engineer when I started, and I always thought that if you're a civil engineer, you're going to be working with structures, you're going to be in a construction site. And I got to know a little bit about transportation much later, a little bit after I graduated. And it was something that it really got my attention very quickly because of how different it is. And as you even mentioned, because of the way that you can work with the data. And I also, as I said, I really like AI and machine learning. And I think these are topics that interests, it gets my interest. I feel like because again, it's so different than what you would expect for civil engineering. You have a lot of maybe even data science involved, and also by doing that, we can help optimize how traffic works. We can help with safety, and there are a lot of areas that you can help the community just by doing something that I personally I enjoy. I find it fun, especially some stuff that we do here. So being able to pair that with helping the community, it's definitely something that I can say that I will be proud of doing when I graduate and I'm finally able to work with that. So yeah,
I love
that's
that,
my
Antilio. That's fantastic. So I'll encourage you all of you leaders specifically for the ITE chapter to go to the new engineering, the introductory engineering courses, especially at the beginning of each semester, and just ask them if you can talk for just a couple minutes about what you do, about ITE, and try to encourage especially those undecided engineering students to come to transportation. Because just like you said, Attilio, I also went into civil and had no intentions of going into transportation. And I think a lot of us, you'll find, kind of fall into transportation, but how amazing would it be if we could convince more people to come into transportation purposefully, right? So I love that we're all so passionate about it and would love to see you all share your passions.
Okay, do we have anybody that wants to either ask a question or talk about your experience as a civil engineer or transportation engineer? I guess not. So, Jasmine, do you want to say something?
Yes. A big thank you to Miss Jodi Godfrey for this amazing presentation. If you guys would like to rewatch this webinar later on, it'll be posted on YouTube. For our next event, we have an ITE general body meeting on Friday with Miss Alexandra Lopez, and then a webinar in October, which I'll be sending out a reminder through email. Thank you all for being here today, and I hope you have a great rest of your Monday.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.